This lesson, we'll take a closer look at how to use clues to figure out missing words in Complete the Words questions. These questions aren't about guessing random letters. They're about noticing how English sentences work. The text will give you lots of clues to get the right words. Answering in a step-by-step way and knowing which type of clues to look for can help you get quick points on the reading section. There are three main kinds of clues to pay attention to: grammar structure, common word combinations, and context from the passage. We'll look at each one in turn with an example passage similar to a real TOEFL question. When you're faced with blanks like these, don't just focus on the missing letters. Focus on what the words around the missing letters and what the sentence is telling you. Grammar gives you clues about what kind of word should fit. Collocations, which are common word pairings, help you predict what words usually go together. And the overall passage context tells you what makes logical sense. If you combine all three strategies, you'll find that these questions become much faster and less intimidating. Here's our example passage about shield volcanoes. At first, it looks incomplete and maybe even confusing. With so many words missing, how can you guess any single one? But if you take them step by step, each word you fill in will make the next one easier. And for many of these blanks, there are two or even three different types of clues that you can use. So some of them will be easier than others. Start with those easy ones. You don't need to go from left to right through all of them in order. All right, so let's look at our first type of clue. Grammar structures. Every blank belongs to a certain word type, a verb, a preposition, a noun, etc. Figuring out what kind of word fits there is often half the challenge. Look at the words before and after the blank. What types of words are possible? Grammar limits your options. If you have a sentence starting with the students, the next word will probably be a verb, right? And at the same time, the verb can't be was studying, because there were multiple students. The verb would be were studying. Word types in agreement like that will help you guess the blanks. Let's apply that logic to the passage. The words in purple all have some grammar clues to help you understand them. After the word lava, we will need a verb to say what the lava does. So most likely we want a verb that starts with FL. Then after that verb, we have a word starting with EAS. There are a couple kinds of words that regularly follow verbs. Sometimes they are prepositions, but this word is too long to be a preposition. Most likely, this will be an adverb. Pause the video and take a minute to think about the word types for every word in purple. Okay, so now let's look at the answers for those words. The example we just talked about becomes flows easily. We needed a verb that follows lava. The verb flow is a good verb for lava, and it has to end with an S, flows, in order to agree with the singular noun lava. Then the adverb that describes flows must be easily. It's the only adverb that starts with EAS and is appropriate here. And because it is an adverb, not an adjective, it has to be easily, not easy. While answering these, you may have already started using our next type of clue. The word flow is commonly combined with lava. So let's talk about that type of hint. These are collocations, words that naturally go together. These include phrasal verbs like build up or spread out, as well as verb-object pairs like make a decision and familiar phrases like over time. These patterns are everywhere in English, and the TOEFL uses them to check whether you recognize natural phrasing. When you spot one half of a collocation, it often helps you find the missing word. Now let's look again at the passage. If you already know common collocations, several blanks become easier. The green words here are all collocations with the purple blanks. What words go with them? Here are the answers again to those blanks. Pay attention to each collocation. Lava flows isn't common in everyday English because we don't talk about lava often, but spreads out definitely is common, and over time is even more common. These types of hints are often even better than grammar clues, but even better is using both at the same time. Between these two types of clues, you can usually fill in most of the missing words. The final clue type is the overall passage context. Reading the full paragraph helps you see how each sentence connects to the next. You might notice a cause, a contrast, or a sequence. Those logical relationships narrow down your choices. And if you've already filled out some blanks using collocations and grammar needs, then those connections are easier to see. Sometimes the context you need is just from the main topics of the reading. If the passage is about volcanoes, it would make sense to have the word mountains in the blanks. If you don't read the full passage, it can be hard to identify those key content words. Imagine you filled out all of the blanks except one, like this. The missing purple word describes the shape of the volcano. But what shape is it? Well, earlier in the passage, we see that shield volcanoes are broad, gently sloping mountains. That tells us they are broad, which is a synonym for wide. And so the earlier part of the passage gave us the information we needed. Let's try that again, but with a relationship word. In this case, we have filled out every word except for the purple one. Early in the sentence, it says that lava flows easily. Then the final words are cooling and hardening. There is a clear time relationship here. First, the lava flows, then it cools and hardens. So from meaning, not from grammar, we can understand the missing word is before. But notice how this was easiest to do after many of the other words were already filled in. That's why we save this strategy for last. Start with the others, grammar and collocations, then fill in the final missing words with the complete passage context. When you face complete the words questions, don't rely on letter patterns alone. Use all three clues, grammar, collocations, and passage context, to find what makes sense grammatically and logically. Read the full passage, focus on what sounds natural, and fill in easier words first. The goal isn't to decode every blank individually, it's to make the sentence sound and feel like real English. In this lesson, we'll look at the academic passage portion of the new TOEFL reading section. These longer texts are still simpler than real academic articles, but they require more careful reading than the daily life passages. You'll need to understand how the passage is organized, what the main point is, and how certain details support that point. The goal is not to memorize facts from the passage. It's to follow the writer's explanation or description and show that you understood the core ideas. Now, academic texts in the real world have a wide range of topics and difficulty levels, but there's a bit more narrow of a range on the TOEFL. The academic passages cover topics you might study in an introductory college course, such as history, earth science, biology, anthropology, or art history. They don't include very technical topics like engineering or chemistry. While the language is more formal and structured than what you see in the daily life texts, it's still written in simplified academic English and is meant to be widely understandable. Even when a passage mentions technical concepts, the test doesn't expect you to know them ahead of time. It'll provide any explanations or definitions you need. The challenge comes from reading longer sentences and connecting ideas across paragraphs, not from the subject material. In comparison to the daily life passages, the academic passages are noticeably longer, typically around 150 to 250 words. Each reading module contains one of these passages, so there are two total on the test. Because they're more detailed and contain more information, each passage has 5 multiple-choice questions. These longer texts are also denser, with more background information and more connections between sentences, so you should expect to spend more time reading them than the daily life passages. You'll want to save time for them by moving through the earlier passage types quickly. So, they can be a bit more challenging than the daily life texts, but even though the passages are about academic subjects, they're still written to be readable for English language learners who haven't actually studied these topics before. You may see some domain-specific words, like sediment, migration, or cultural practices, but they're usually defined or demonstrated in the surrounding sentences. Often, the organization follows a simple pattern, such as cause and effect, comparison, or a short historical sequence. It's not like reading a couple of random paragraphs from a book. It has a clear start and end, and covers the main idea fully. All right, let's take a look at a sample academic passage titled The Origins of Language. It discusses how writing developed in early civilizations and how written systems gradually evolved from simple marks to symbols that represented ideas and sounds. Take a minute to pause this video and read the text, looking especially at how it is structured. Okay, there's a clear organization here in this passage. You can see how the text introduces a general topic, provides an example from one society in the second paragraph, then other societies in the third paragraph, and finally broadens to the larger significance of writing in the final sentences. The length and density are typical for TOEFL academic passages. You're expected to understand the flow of ideas, not memorize every detail. That structure can be very useful when answering the questions, because the first one for each passage almost always asks about the main idea of the text, which is meant to check whether you understood the big picture before focusing on individual details. The remaining questions typically ask about key facts mentioned in the text, the meaning of a vocabulary word in context, or a small inference that follows directly from the information given. The test never requires complicated logic. Everything you need is in the passage itself, often stated simply in a single sentence. If you understand the meanings and sentence structures, you can get the answers. In terms of strategy, there are two main approaches to reading academic passages, and you should choose the one that fits your strengths. One option is to read the full passage carefully before looking at any questions. This works well if you prefer to understand the structure and main idea before focusing on details. The other option is to read the questions first, but only the questions, not the answer choices. This helps you know what to look for when you begin reading. Stronger readers may find this approach faster because it directs their attention to the parts of the passage that matter most for scoring points. Whichever strategy you use, be mindful of your timing. Because the text is a bit longer, these questions will take longer than the daily life passage questions on average. You should aim for around 30 to 45 seconds per question, which means roughly 3 to 4 minutes for the entire passage. Because these texts are longer, expect to spend more time reading at the beginning. Try to read smoothly without stopping for every unfamiliar word, then return to the passage for each question to confirm the answer. Keeping a good pace earlier in the reading section ensures you have enough time when you reach these denser academic passages. Now, we've said that the passages use moderately challenging vocabulary, but aren't overly technical, and that the TOEFL doesn't test extremely technical terms. But there are questions on specific vocabulary words, which we call vocabulary in context questions. When you see a vocab in context question, it's usually asking about a somewhat academic word, but one that you might also hear in daily life, and it only asks about the dictionary definition of the word, not a trick question on a word that can have very different meanings in different contexts. Examples of typical vocabulary items include words like curating, milestone, ingenuity, fluctuation, and disruption. These are low-frequency words in English. They aren't specific to a single topic. To summarize, there is one academic passage in each reading module for a total of 2 on the test. These passages are longer and more information-heavy than the daily life readings, but they don't require any outside knowledge. Expect 5 questions per passage, mostly focused on the main idea, details, vocabulary, and small inferences. Choose a reading strategy that works for you. Either read carefully up front or skim and scan with a clear purpose, and maintain steady pacing so you can work through the passage efficiently. In this lesson, we're going to look at main idea questions, which often appear as the first question on a reading passage, especially the academic passages. These questions seem simple, but they're easy to get wrong if you focus too much on small details. The goal is to understand the overall point of the passage, what the writer is trying to explain or describe, not one interesting example or one sentence. We'll walk through how the test frames these questions and look at a couple of examples. to show the difference between answers that sound correct and answers that actually reflect the full meaning of the text. The name for this type of question pretty much explains it. A main idea question asks about the passage's overall topic. It isn't asking you to repeat a detail or pull out one specific fact. Instead, it wants the general idea that ties the whole passage together. Again, these are almost always the first question in academic passages, and they test whether you made sense of the structure rather than getting stuck on specific vocabulary or details. If an answer only fits one part of the passage, then it isn't the main idea, even if the wording feels familiar or matches a sentence from the text. There are a few reliable ways to find the main idea. For academic readings, the first and last paragraphs, and often the first and last sentences themselves, are usually the clearest signals because they introduce the topic and then wrap up the author's point. As you read, pay attention to repeated ideas and phrasing. Those patterns usually point to the central theme. Wrong answer choices will often miss that theme because they are either too specific or because they create new ideas not in the text. Note that for daily life passages, the first question is often about the purpose of the text, not the main idea. These are a little different, and we'll talk about them in a separate lesson later. So, as we were saying, main idea questions often come with specific styles of wrong answers, so it helps to know what patterns to avoid. A very common trap is an answer that's too narrow, something true from one small part of the passage, but nowhere else. Another trap is an answer that's too broad and includes ideas that never appear in the text. You'll also see choices that contain accurate details, but focus on the wrong thing. And in some cases, the test reuses vocabulary from the passage in a way that distorts the original meaning, making the choice sound correct, even though it isn't. We'll see examples of most of these later in this video. Here is our academic example, the origins of language, which we've also seen in earlier lessons. The passage explains how writing began in several ancient civilizations and how it changed over time. It also describes how writing transformed society by allowing people to record information, preserve stories, and communicate across long distances. Don't spend too long reading the whole passage again. Pause the video and focus only on the key words, the beginning and the end of the text. For that passage, we might get a question that looks like this. The language of the question is very direct, and you might see this exact same question on your real TOEFL. What is the main focus of the passage? Now, if you look only at keywords, there are a few answer choices that all might be reasonable. We see words like writing, language, development, record keeping, and ancient alphabets. All of those match the keywords of the passage. So if you're moving quickly or don't understand some other vocabulary in the answer choices, they can be tempting. Because the wrong answers can be distracting, it's a good idea to start by summarizing the passage in your own words, even before reading the answer choices. We've cut most of the passage out and highlighted some sentences and phrases from the beginning and end of the passage. Based only on those highlighted words, we can create a simple summary. Something simple like how writing developed and why it mattered captures the big idea. Once you've done that, compare your summary with each answer choice. Now let's look again at those answer choices. The correct answer is B. This is close to our predicted answer, how writing developed and why it mattered. When you predict the answer using your own summary, the correct choice can become easier to spot. The other choices aren't completely random, but they shift the emphasis in ways that don't match the full passage. The first one, answer A, focuses too much on spoken language, which is barely mentioned. The word replaced is a problem in particular. Writing didn't replace speaking. That would mean people stopped speaking. Meanwhile, answer C focuses on tools, just one detail in the passage. Yes, people use tools to create written language, but those tools aren't the main idea. It's too narrow. And finally, D mentions similarities between modern and ancient alphabets, which appears in only one sentence at the very end. The passage does talk about modern and ancient alphabets, but the similarities are not the focus. The correct main idea needs to cover the entire text, and B is the only one that does that. To wrap up, the main idea must match the whole passage, not just part of it. Look for repeated themes, check the subject and verb of the first sentence in each paragraph, and eliminate choices that are too narrow or that distort the original meaning. Main idea questions are usually the first one you'll see in an academic passage, and predicting the answer in your own words before looking at the choices is the most reliable strategy. The more you practice summarizing quickly, the easier these questions become. Just be cautious with the wrong answers. Be sure that the main subject and verb matches your prediction well enough, and don't distort the meaning with other words that don't match the text. With practice, these can become some of the easier questions on the reading section of the TOEFL. In this lesson, we're going to talk about two related reading skills, skimming and scanning. Both are ways of finding information efficiently, without reading every single word. These skills are important because the TOEFL will ask you specific questions about texts that have plenty of details not directly related to the question. You'll use these strategies that help you locate the information you need quickly and accurately. First, let's clarify what skimming and scanning have in common. In both cases, the goal is to find information, not to read carefully from beginning to end. You are intentionally not reading everything. Instead, you're making decisions about what to pay attention to and what to ignore based on your purpose. And as for how they differ, skimming helps you understand what a passage or paragraph is mostly about, focusing on the big picture, while scanning helps you locate specific details when you already know what you're looking for. Let's talk through how to skim a passage first. Skimming is about finding main ideas and general topics. When you skim, you're asking questions like, what is this passage mostly about? What is the main point of this paragraph? You might look at the first sentence of a paragraph, key nouns, or repeated ideas. Skimming is especially useful when you need to understand the overall structure of a passage or summarize what it says, rather than remember specific facts. Here's an example passage. When skimming this text, you should not try to understand every sentence. Instead, focus on how the passage is organized. Remember to pay attention specifically to the beginning and end of each paragraph, and notice key words that give you a sense of the structure, the general topic of each paragraph. Here, we've highlighted some of the key sentences that you might notice while skimming. The opening paragraph introduces the topic of writing and why it matters. The middle paragraphs describe early writing systems in different civilizations. The final paragraph explains the broader impact of writing. From skimming alone, you should understand that the passage is about the origins and importance of writing, not about one specific civilization or technical process. And in terms of structure, it starts with a general introduction, then gives a few examples, then closes with a quick summary of the impact of writing. Okay, let's move on to scanning. This skill, unlike skimming, is about finding specific details. When you scan, you already know what you're looking for. That might be a date, a name, a definition, or a specific example mentioned in a question. Instead of reading line by line, you move your eyes quickly through the text, looking for keywords or phrases related to the question. Once you find the right spot, then you slow down and read more carefully. Now look at this question. According to the passage, what was one result of the invention of writing? Before looking back at the passage, notice the key idea you're searching for. A result of writing. You are not looking for dates, names, or locations. You are looking for an effect or outcome. When you scan the passage with this question in mind, look for language that describes consequences or results. Phrases like making it possible, allowed humans to, or enabled are strong signals. Once you find those sentences, read them carefully and compare them to the answer choices. Scanning helps you go directly to the relevant part of the text instead of rereading everything. Returning to the question and answer choices, you should now be able to eliminate options that are not supported by the passage. The correct answer restates an idea found directly in the text, that writing allowed people to share and record information in new ways. The tricky part is that other answer choices do include keywords that are used in the text. The third option in particular mentions governments, and we did see a sentence about writing changing governments at the end of the text. So it's still important to read the answer choices carefully. That one is wrong, because the text said governments became more organized, not less organized. Strong readers combine skimming and scanning. First, skim to understand the topic and structure of the passage. Then, scan to locate the exact information needed for each question. Avoid rereading the entire passage for every question. That approach wastes time and isn't necessary. To summarize, skimming and scanning are both about finding information efficiently. Skimming helps you identify main topics and overall meaning, which is useful for summaries and big picture understanding. Scanning helps you locate specific details, which is necessary for answering most reading questions. Neither skill means guessing or ignoring the text. Instead, they help you use your time wisely and read strategically. Difficult sentences can cause trouble because test takers get stuck looking at something they don't understand. They read the same sentence again and again, and that takes time. So what do you do if you don't understand a sentence, or you have trouble understanding a lot of vocabulary in a reading passage? What do you want to do in TOEFL reading? When you're looking at that difficult text, you might think, I need to understand all of this, right? Well, no, you don't need to understand everything. You only need to know how to answer the questions. You only need to understand some of the text, not all of it. The only parts that actually matter are the parts that help answer the questions. The academic reading passages are very dense, meaning they contain a lot of information in a small space. There are many details, but only a limited number of questions. And not only are there few questions, some of the questions are just about specific vocabulary words, which don't require full understanding of the text. Because there's a lot of information, but only a few questions, that means some phrases and sentences don't need to be perfectly understood. You want to understand most of the text, of course, but it doesn't need to be everything. So, when should you take the time to reread and analyze a sentence? Only when two things are true. It's clearly related to a question, and you have enough time. If you're short on time and the sentence doesn't connect to a question, don't get stuck on it. Instead, think about the paragraph as a whole and what you expect the sentence to be saying based on context. If the main ideas are clear and you're able to answer the questions, then it doesn't matter if you don't fully understand a sentence. If it seems important for a question, but you're running low on time, then make a guess based on other sentences. We'll do an example of this together. Here, we have our passage about early forms of writing, but this time we've changed some of the words. Several of them aren't real English. They're nonsense. This is just to simulate how it feels when a sentence is very hard to understand. The goal isn't to decode every word, but to notice the topic of the paragraph and how ideas are developing. Even without understanding every term, you can still follow the general direction of the text. When you're confused by a sentence, ask two questions. What is this paragraph about? And what do I expect this sentence to say? In this example, we can ignore the nonsense words and focus on the other pieces that we do understand. Based on the first sentence, the paragraph is about the earliest known form of writing. It describes writing and how people used it. Then it uses two important transition phrases, at first and over time. So these sentences are describing how that early writing form changed over time. By combining context clues from earlier and later sentences, you can confirm that basic idea. Even without understanding the unfamiliar words, we see this idea of a change over time, and we also see number of sheep compared to tell stories. So the sentence is probably about how the usage of writing changed. It was used for one thing at first, then over time, it was used for another thing. And honestly, that is the whole meaning of the sentence. The missing words didn't cause any trouble for meaning. We can use the main topic, the organization words, and some logical thinking to guess the big ideas, even if we don't know the meanings of individual words. To recap, focus on the questions first. Don't spend time rereading difficult sentences before you know whether they matter. If time is limited, rely on the surrounding paragraph to guide your understanding. And if you do analyze a sentence, break it into pieces, looking at the organizational hints, such as transition words. In this lesson, we'll look at the daily life reading passages in the new TOEFL. These are short, practical texts that come from everyday English, things like emails, announcements, or social media posts. Unlike the longer academic readings, these passages are designed to test how well you understand information from common, real-world sources. The focus is on recognizing the purpose of the message, key details, and how to find information efficiently without rereading too much. Daily life passages look and sound like something you might actually encounter outside of a classroom. They can include short emails, public notices, advertisements, flyers, or online messages. They're clearly fictional and not exactly like real-world content. There's no slang, for example, which you might see in advertising in real life, but they're at least based on those types of scenarios. The tone is straightforward and functional, and you'll rarely see technical vocabulary. The goal is to understand the main idea, why it was written, and what the reader needs to know or do. These questions measure how well you can process real communication in English, not just academic text. There are two types of daily life readings, short and medium. Short passages are around 40 to 50 words and have just two multiple choice questions. Medium passages are longer, about 70 to 100 words, and come with three questions each. Both types focus on familiar topics like travel, local events, or work messages. You won't see long arguments or analysis, just brief, information-centered writing. Each question relates directly to the text's purpose or its important details, so you don't need to read very deeply or use much logic, just the language. Here's an example of a short passage. You might see something like a short social media post announcing a local event, say a community outdoor movie night. The text might include the date, location, and what people should bring. The first question would probably ask about the purpose of the post, while the second might ask for one specific piece of information. But you won't see a question as simple as, where is the event? Because there's only one location in this text. The details that are asked about will have some way you might get distracted. This text mentions two different times, both sunset and 6 p.m., so it's possible there will be a question on those times. But again, the actual content is very short and informational. Medium-length passages might look like a short email or notice from a business. In this example, we see an update from an airline about their baggage policy, what bags you can bring on the airplane. The message describes what's changing when the new rules start and what passengers should do. One question would probably ask why the email was sent, and the others might focus on details such as weight limits or numbers of bags. Even though the text is longer, the logic is the same. You're reading for purpose and facts, not interpretation. The first question almost always deals with purpose, why the text exists or who wrote it. It might ask something like, what type of business wrote the message? Or, what is the main purpose of the message? Any other questions focus on specific details such as instructions, times, or restrictions. Occasionally, there's an inference question asking you to figure out something that's implied, not written in exact words, but these are less common. And even in an inference question, you don't need logical thinking. The writing will make the inference 100% clear. When you read a daily life passage, skim first to get the main idea and purpose. Don't worry about understanding every single word. Instead, think about who wrote the message and why. Try reading the questions before you look at the answer choices. That way, you know what to look for when you read. But if you read the question first, read only the question, not the 4 answer choices. Just learn what you should look for, then look for it. Then go find the answer in the text before checking the choices. These passages are short, so you don't need to take notes. Just stay focused. As you saw in the examples, these passages use common vocabulary and short, simple sentences. You might see a few words that are specific to the context, like cabin space or economy seating in an airline email, but nothing technical or overly formal. You don't need to know every word to answer correctly. If a word is unfamiliar, don't stress. The questions may not ask about it anyway. Understanding the purpose of the text and finding any specific details that are referenced in the questions are the only 2 things that matter. For timing, keep in mind that the reading section averages about 30 seconds per question, so short passages should take about 1 minute total, and medium passages about 1.5 minutes. The key is not to reread the text multiple times. Read once for general understanding, then return to the relevant sentence when answering. Efficient pacing matters here because the questions are quick and direct. And after the daily life passages, there is a longer academic passage. That text is also short compared to older versions of the TOEFL, but it is still longer and denser than the daily life passages, so you want to save more time for it. To sum up, daily life passages test your ability to understand short, everyday texts rather than academic material. They might appear as emails, flyers, social media posts, or notices, and your job is to identify who wrote them, why they were written, and what key information they include. Focus on the questions that matter, not on every word in the text. These are some of the most approachable questions on the TOEFL if you stay organized, read with purpose, and manage your time wisely. If you've watched our other lessons on the TOEFL reading section, this topic should be familiar. Answer choices that look okay at first, but are actually traps. Luckily, the TOEFL does not have many traps like this. Often, wrong answers are just simply wrong. If you understand the meaning of the English, then there's no trick. But sometimes even advanced English speakers can get a wrong answer by falling into a trap. They choose an answer that matches the passage, but not the right part of the passage. So the question is, how do we avoid that? First, let's illustrate how this trap works. Our little example here doesn't have real content, just filler to show the organization. The question clearly connects to the passage, and the correct answer is somewhere in the text. The question includes a keyword, which connects to the first paragraph. However, one or more wrong answer choices also connect to the passage, but they connect to a different part. So idea 1 and idea 2 are both in the passage, but idea 2 is not connected to the keyword from the question. It's about the wrong idea in the wrong sentence or in the wrong paragraph. So the problem is not whether the answer sounds familiar. The problem is whether it answers this specific question. Now let's look at an example academic passage about the origins of writing. We've seen this same text in other lessons, but even if you don't remember it well, don't worry about reading it in detail right now. First, let's move to our question. Here's the question. What is one medium used in early writing systems mentioned in the passage? Pause the video for a moment and try to answer this question yourself before moving on. To answer this type of question correctly, don't rely on memory. Instead, identify the keyword from the question, in this case, the word medium, and scan the passage for that idea or a synonym. Once you find it, Read the entire sentence carefully before choosing an answer. Now, we return to the passage. When you scan for information about writing materials, you should notice two references. One is about clay, and the other about bones. The correct answer should be one of these two. Here are the answer choices again. Without the text, all sound reasonable. Some refer to materials that could have been used historically, but only one of these options is directly supported by the passage itself. That is the key difference. From the two options we saw, clay or bones, the one that matches an answer choice is D, animal bones. But you may have noticed two other answer choices had words in common with the text. Those are examples of the trap. When we look back at the passage, we see this sentence about concepts, often objects or quantities, such as the number of sheep or jars of grain. And we see in the answer choices two matching keywords. Answer choice B mentions sheep, and answer choice C mentions jars. Wrong answers often include keywords that appear in the passage or related ideas that feel familiar. But a single shared word is not enough. If the answer choice is connected to a different sentence or a different idea, it is still wrong, even if it sounds academic or logical. In this case, the sentence that includes jars and sheep is not about the medium that was used for writing. Instead, it described what was being counted in early writing. The medium is the material that is used, like paper. The jars and sheep are the ideas, not the paper itself. This kind of trap is also very frequent in daily life passages. Since these are short passages, you might be tempted to race through them quickly. However, these are often filled with details that can be used as traps, so always make sure you're looking in the place that answers the question asked. Pause the video to try this one on your own before we go over it. Let's look at the answer choices. Saturday only. That's a real day from the ad, but it's the day hiking boots are on sale, not rain jackets. Both Saturday and Sunday. That's also a real detail from the ad because the entire sale runs on both Saturday and Sunday. But the rain jackets are on sale only on Sunday. So, two of the three wrong answers came directly from the ad. They weren't made up. They just answer a different question. In other words, be careful. Recognizing a detail is not the same as answering the actual question. In passages, whether short or long, it's easy to grab a familiar-looking detail without matching it back to the actual question. To summarize, the correct answer is always in the passage, but wrong answers often are too. Use question keywords to guide you while you scan for the answer, then read the full sentence where you find them. Don't rely on memory, and don't choose an answer just because one word looks familiar. On the TOEFL reading section, the right detail, not just any matching detail, is what matters most. In this lesson, we'll look at a common type of incorrect answer choice, one that has information that might be factually true, but just isn't in the text. This trap is simple enough. When you read through the answer choices, some of them might be attractive because they make sense, and sometimes are true in real life, but they just don't appear in the passage. The reason these traps exist is to make sure you actually read the passage, not just the questions. On the TOEFL, if you skip reading and go straight to the questions, you won't be able to get a correct answer unless you then go back and read the text after the question. That's a perfectly fine strategy, but you do need to find the answer in the text, not just rely on your knowledge. This is where it's important to remember what the TOEFL is testing. This is a test of communication, not knowledge. You do not need to know anything about the topic before you read. If you already know about the topic, that usually won't help you. What matters is what you read in the passage. That means you cannot answer questions based on background knowledge or real-world expectations. Even if an answer choice sounds right or matches your experience, it still has to match the text. The only way to answer reading questions correctly is by understanding the passage and using information that is clearly supported there. Here's an example passage from a daily life context. It's an email from an airline explaining changes to baggage policies. If you haven't already read this passage, pause the video and take a minute to read it. Now look at the question. According to the email, what may occur if a flight is fully booked? This wording is important. The question is not asking what usually happens on full flights in real life. It specifically says, according to the email. But just for learning purposes, let's go through these answer choices without the text in mind. At first, many answer choices look reasonable. On full flights, passengers may be reassigned to new seats. Carry-on luggage may be checked. Flights might be delayed. These things can happen in real life, and that's why this trap is tempting. If you think only about what could be true, several answers seem possible. This is the key problem. Asking yourself what could be true does not answer the question. We're left with multiple options still. The TOEFL is not asking about real-world airline behavior. It's asking about what the passage says. At this point, we need to change how we approach the question. So let's do this the right way and go back to the text. We look specifically for information that answers the question, what may occur if a flight is fully booked? We should scan the text quickly to find keywords that relate to the question. After we scan, we find this sentence. For full flights, some passengers may have their carry-on items checked free of charge, depending on available cabin space. If we focus on that, then the correct answer is much clearer. The correct answer is the one that matches the information in the email, not the one that sounds most reasonable. This is why reading carefully and checking the text is essential. Looking back at the question, the correct answer is the one that matches the information in the email, not the one that sounds most reasonable. This is why reading carefully and checking the text is essential. The only one that matches the passage is answer choice C. This wrong answer trap creates a challenge because the answer choices make sense. But make sense is not enough. The TOEFL tests communication, not knowledge. Always find the answer in the text, and don't assume that a factually true option is the correct one. The next type of questions we're going to talk about are purpose questions, sometimes called function questions. They can be some of the harder questions in the reading section of the TOEFL because they require you to understand not only what is written, but why it was written. So they're a bit like main idea questions because they are about the bigger picture, not just a single word or sentence. Purpose questions ask why the author included something, not what it means. It could be a single phrase or an entire sentence. And in the case of daily life texts, it's often the passage as a whole because they're so short, but the goal is always the same, to understand the author's reason for writing it. These don't appear as often as vocabulary or detail questions, but they show up frequently enough that you should be ready for them. The key is to think beyond the literal meaning of the words and consider the writer's choices. Purpose questions want you to connect details to the passage's larger message. Maybe the sentence clarifies an idea that might confuse readers, or maybe it supports the main point by giving a quick example. Sometimes the detail narrows the focus or adds context that the author needs before continuing. These questions test whether you can see how the small pieces fit into the whole without overthinking the logic or imagining ideas that aren't in the text. Now, to answer these kinds of questions correctly, similar to other question types, you always need to go back to the passage. If the question asks about a specific phrase or idea, you'll need to find that, then read the sentence before and after it. Ask yourself what purpose that detail serves in the paragraph. Does it explain something? Provide an example? Avoid confusion? Once you've decided what job the detail is doing, match that idea to the answer choice that stays closest to the text's actual meaning. These purpose questions reward understanding the passage as a whole, not a single sentence. One helpful tip that I'll point out early is focus on the verbs in the answer choices. They're not the only thing you need, but they can provide very helpful clues. We'll see more of that in practice in a minute or two. Purpose questions come with some predictable wrong answer types, some of which you'll recognize from other kinds of reading questions. Many wrong choices are too specific, adding information the passage never mentions. Others go too far and claim the author is making a strong argument when the wording in the passage is much more neutral, or even in the opposite opinion. You'll also see answer choices that describe the meaning of the detail rather than the purpose of including it. Whenever an answer adds new ideas, changes the tone, or claims something the passage doesn't support, eliminate it. Here we have that academic passage on early writing systems that we'll use for the example. The important thing to notice when you tackle purpose questions is how each paragraph builds on the last. In this passage, the author starts by just introducing the topic, the origins of writing. Then in the second paragraph, they talk about one specific early writing system from Mesopotamia. The third paragraph gives a couple of other examples of early writing systems, and then the final paragraph just quickly summarizes the impact of those developments. Keep that structure in mind as we look at the example of a purpose question. Now, let's move on to that example. It asks why the author mentions wedge-shaped marks. This means you'll return to the exact place in the passage where that phrase appears. Before looking at the answer choices, read the sentences both before and after wedge-shaped marks, and think about the author's overall purpose in that section. Returning to the passage, we find the key words we need in the second paragraph. It's a good idea to read this whole paragraph to make sure we have the full context in mind. Overall, that section seems to be providing some historical context on why written language first developed to record things like numbers of sheep, then mentions that it changed over time to become more complex. The line about wedge-shaped marks is a detailed example of that simple early writing. It illustrates how cuneiform writing physically worked. a basic, concrete detail that supports the explanation of how writing began. And now that we have that context in mind, let's come back to the question and its answer choices. A quick look at the verbs can be helpful here, so we've highlighted them in purple for you. Even without reading the full answer choices, we might find a verb that matches our understanding. If you don't know what preclude means, that's okay. There are also others to look at. Suggest and support in answer choices B and C are both verbs about making an argument or giving an opinion. Answer choice D says illustrate. That looks closer to what we expect. So let's read D first to check if it matches. To illustrate the simplicity of an early system of recording information. That looks pretty good. The word simplicity is one that we want to verify. Does the text say that the writing was simple? But if we look back at the passage, it does match pretty well. The writing changed from being simple, about numbers of sheep, to more complicated later. On the other hand, answers A, B, and C all point to opinions that the author doesn't express. In A, even if we don't know the word preclude, there is no evidence for an argument against cuneiform being a written language. And in answer choice B, we see a comparison between cuneiform and hieroglyphics, but hieroglyphics aren't mentioned in this part of the passage at all. And finally, answer choice C focuses on the accessibility of the tools. There is no argument about that in the text. It's too focused on the tools, which are not the point. The point is about the writing system itself. A quick review on strategy before we wrap up. Purpose questions always ask why, not what. That means you're looking for the author's reasoning, not the definition of a word. Keep your thinking tied to the text's main point. Stay wary of answer choices that add arguments or opinions the author never makes. And above all, don't overcomplicate it. Purpose questions tend to have straightforward answers once you connect the detail to the broader idea. If the logic behind an answer choice seems too complicated, it's probably because it's incorrect. Stay focused on the bigger picture. To summarize, purpose questions test whether you can understand the structure of the passage and why the author is writing it. The correct answer will always reflect the author's intent and will stay close to the text. Be sure to read around any specific keywords to get all of the context, eliminate choices that overreach, and keep the big picture in mind. These aren't always the easiest questions, but remember, the TOEFL is a test of English, not logic. And that's it for purpose questions for now. In this video, we're going to look at inference questions. That's a word that might be new for you. Inference. What are inference questions? They ask you to figure something out. To infer means to take information, and from that information come to a conclusion. They're very similar to detail questions, in that you look at a specific part of the text, and then answer the question based on that information. Inference questions ask you to determine something that the passage implies. That means you're using information that's in the text, but the exact sentence you need might not appear perfectly in the text. The key is that the inference is always small. You're not interpreting themes or making predictions. You're just connecting information that the author has already provided. If you try to think too deeply, you'll go beyond what the test expects. The TOEFL wants you to work with the text you have, not imagine something else. So, why are they different from detailed questions? What are they testing? These questions test whether you can combine clues, not always relying on a single sentence, or whether you can understand the purpose of a sentence. You might read two short phrases in different parts of a paragraph and put them together to form one clear idea. Another way to think about it is that inference questions check your understanding of meaning more than your vocabulary. If you understand the logic of the passage, the inference will be clear, even if the exact words are not said. If you rely only on vocabulary and sentence structure, you won't find the answer easily, because the correct answer won't be written perfectly. Before we look at a real example, it's important to say what these questions aren't. They're not guesses, and they're not asking for your opinion or a prediction of any kind. They're also not asking you to read hidden messages or to imagine something the writer never mentioned. An inference must be 100% supported by the passage, even if the passage doesn't say it in one perfect sentence. If your conclusion could be argued, or if it feels like a stretch, it's probably not the right answer. As for strategy, it's pretty much the same as detailed questions. Start with the question, and don't yet read the answer choices. Identify the keywords. Then return to the passage and look for the lines that relate to those keywords. The clue you need may be in just one sentence, or you may need to combine two nearby ideas. Once you find the relevant information, choose the answer that must be true based on what you read. If an answer is only possibly true, or if you'd need extra information to prove it, eliminate it. The correct inference is the one that requires no real assumptions. If you aren't able to predict the answer after reading the text, process of elimination can be useful here, similar to accept questions. Remove any option that contradicts the passage, and remove options that add new information that the passage never mentioned. Also, be careful of choices that feel too strong. Words like always or only are common traps unless the passage also has strong language. In the end, only one choice will match the combined clues in a small, reasonable way. Now then, let's look at an example from a daily life passage. These short texts are great for inference practice because the clues are small and easy to locate. In this case, we have a social media post announcing an outdoor film night at a city park. The text gives details about the event, what time it starts, what people should bring, and what will be available. Here's the question. What can be inferred about the seating available at the event? The keyword here is seating, which is never mentioned in the text. That's what makes this an inference question. So that means we have to look for related ideas. There may not even be synonyms to look for, but we can keep in mind the general idea of seating when we go back to the text and scan it. So we return to the text and look for any sentences that might be related to seating. These daily life passages are short, so it is quick to find the relevant line. The most important detail is in the part that says, bring a blanket and enjoy a family-friendly movie under the stars. That's our clue. Why would people need to bring a blanket? It's probably to sit on, right? The writer isn't expecting people to sleep through the movie. And since these movies will be shown outdoors, it makes sense that people would place blankets on the ground. This is a small conclusion, but it's fully supported by the text. After finding the answer in the text, we go back and read the answer choices for the first time. When we do, we see that only one of them matches the detail about the blankets. Options about provided chairs, ticketed seating, or food truck seating are all unsupported. None of those are mentioned at all. But the idea that attendees are expected to bring something to sit on is directly connected to the instruction to bring a blanket. This is the kind of inference the TOEFL uses. Very small, very clear, and based on clues that are easy to find once you know what to look for. Notice that the wrong answers here seem possible. It's normal for an event to provide chairs, for example. And maybe they even will provide some chairs. It's possible that there will be both open seating on the ground on blankets and chairs provided by the organizers. But we can't assume that because there's no support in the text. The only one that is supported clearly is answer choice B. In terms of timing, inference questions usually take around 30 seconds, maybe a bit more if the clues are spread across 2 sentences. Don't reread the entire passage. Instead, skim it quickly to find a sentence that relates to your keywords. If you're unsure, eliminate answers that cannot be true based on the text. When you're left with the option that fits the clues without adding anything new, you found your inference. Like other question types, the more you practice skimming and scanning, the faster this will become. All right, so let's recap. Inference questions require you to make a conclusion that must be true based on the passage, even though it is not written exactly in one sentence. They rely on clues, not guesses, and the logic behind them is always very small. When you combine 2 pieces of information correctly, the answer becomes clear. Use elimination to remove anything unsupported or too extreme, and keep your focus on what the passage actually tells you. They're only slightly different from detail questions. So in the end, you can use basically the same skills and thinking to answer these, and that's all there is to it. There are a few common types of wrong answers in multiple choice reading questions. Extreme answer choices are some of the easiest to eliminate, to decide are wrong, if you know what to look for. Some wrong answers sound reasonable at first, but they use language that is stronger than the text that you read. These answers overstate ideas. They include strong words that just go too far. In these trap answers, you'll often see words like all, always, or never. When the text is more careful or limited, those extreme words don't match. Let's take a look at some types of extremes, so you know what I mean here. First, all or none language, like I just mentioned a moment ago. Absolutes are very similar. Unquestionably, absolutely, completely, totally. All of these are absolutes. And very similar to all or none, they say that there is no possibility of something else, no possibility of the other. You may also see strong opinions or emotions, though it's rare that you see opinions in the reading section. Usually, it's opinions not of the author, but of somebody that the author is writing about. So maybe the author said that Wallace was dissatisfied, and then the answer choice says immediately regretted, which is much stronger. Overgeneralizations are another issue, where an answer talks about a large group when the text discusses a specific case. Finally, superlatives and comparatives, like most important or the most dangerous, can be a signal that the answer is stronger than the passage. It's important to be careful here. Extreme language is not always wrong. Sometimes the passage itself uses strong or absolute wording, And in those cases, an extreme answer can be correct. The key is to compare the strength of the answer directly to the strength of the text. If the passage says some, an answer that says all is probably too strong. But if the passage really does say all, then a weaker answer may actually be wrong. Now let's look at a real example. The question asks, what is suggested in the passage about various early writing systems? This is an inference question. Before we even read the answer choices, we should make sure we have the information from the text to give an answer. Here's the passage you're working with. Our question asked about various early writing systems. The third paragraph is the first one to talk about writing systems other than cuneiform. Most likely, the answer to the question will be in this paragraph. Now that we've revisited the passage, look back at the question and answer choices. This is where the two extreme strategy becomes useful. Ask yourself which answers go further than the passage actually does. Even without reading carefully, there are some words here that should jump out. Mainly, always, and most are all strong words. In comparison, some is a much weaker word. This doesn't mean that C is definitely correct, but we should look there first. Choice C says, some were created without external influence. Comparing that to the text, the passage explains that writing developed in different places. It says that civilizations created their own systems independently. That matches answer choice C pretty well. So we can pick that answer and not even worry about the other answer choices. Maybe they are too extreme because of those strong words, or maybe there are other reasons they are incorrect. But choice C is a close match, so it doesn't really matter. But just for fun, let's look more closely at them. Choice A and choice B both describe things that are sometimes true, but the passage does not suggest they apply broadly to all writing systems. These are both two extreme choices. The text mentions bones that were used in China for spiritual purposes, but it doesn't say that writing was mainly used for that. Similarly, choice B seems reasonable, because the only materials that we read about were hard ones, clay and bone. But the author never says that was always the case. Meanwhile, choice D directly contradicts the passage by claiming most systems were based on cuneiform. The passage actually said that different systems were created independently. To recap, watch for answer choices that overstate what the passage says. Pay close attention to words like all, always, most, and never. Always compare the strength of the answer directly to the strength of the text. When you're unsure, careful, limited claims are usually safer than broad or absolute ones. In this lesson, we're going to look at except questions, which are the opposite of detail questions. Instead of asking what is stated in the text, these questions ask for the one answer choice that is not in the text. The question will use the word except or sometimes not, and it's always written in all capital letters so you don't miss it. Except questions are very similar to detail questions, but in reverse. You're still scanning for specific information, but this time you're confirming whether each option appears somewhere in the text. 3 choices will be facts that the passage supports, and 1 choice won't be supported. It can be tempting to answer based on memory after reading, but these questions are best answered by looking at the passage for each answer choice. You're looking for the statement that the passage does not mention, no matter how logical it might sound. You might be able to guess our strategy then. The most reliable approach to these questions is by process of elimination. With except questions, you're not trying to find one correct sentence. You're confirming 3 of them. That means checking every choice, even if one option looks suspicious right away. Because the test often uses synonyms and paraphrases, an incorrect answer may look a bit different from the passage, even though it does match in meaning. Similarly, a correct answer might use keywords from the passage, but be slightly distorted in meaning. Eliminating choices one by one is the only way to do this reliably. It's slower, but it's how these questions are designed to be solved. So, they're pretty similar to detail questions, right? What makes except questions challenging in that case? Well, for one, there's the same challenge from detail questions. All of the answers will reuse vocabulary from the passage. Telling the difference between one sentence that matches the passage and one that doesn't isn't just about vocabulary, but about the overall meaning. But unlike detail questions, you need to look at every answer choice carefully. It's similar to answering 3 detailed questions at the same time. You have to verify each one carefully. This is why except questions typically take longer than detailed questions, and why you don't want to rush them. Right, now let's look at an example from the same academic passage we've used in other lessons. This passage explains how writing began, and how early writing systems transformed human civilization. Because it's an academic passage, it's longer than the daily life passages. That means our except question might include 3 details from the passage, all from different places. So, what are we going to look for? Here's the example question. According to the passage, writing contributed to all of the following developments, except, followed by 4 choices. Right away, you know this is an except question, because of the all caps except at the end. You can't guess which one is right until you confirm which three are wrong. So the safest approach is to scan the passage for each answer choice, one at a time. This gets us to the correct answer slowly but reliably. When checking an answer choice, you should always begin by identifying the keywords, usually nouns or action verbs, and scanning the text for the same idea or a clear synonym. We've highlighted the keywords for each answer choice that you'll look for in the text. When you take the actual TOEFL, you'll do these one at a time. Start with the first answer choice. Find the keywords, then go to the passage to locate it. Once you confirm that a choice matches the passage's meaning, you can eliminate it. The incorrect choice will be the one that has no match at all. Here's the same passage again, but this time we can see how the keywords connect to specific parts of the passage. Preservation of knowledge across generations. Our first answer choice in purple appears in the third paragraph. The word generations isn't used, but across time is close enough. Answer choice B, meanwhile, matches the green text at the end of the passage. Answer choice C, about oral storytelling, looks close to the orange text in the second paragraph. And finally, choice D, recording trade and history, is right in the introduction, in the blue section. So we found matching keywords for all four answer choices. That's a bit tricky. We'll want to carefully match each answer choice to the text to make sure the meanings are actually the same. Returning to the question, if we compare those answer choices with the text, we'll see one doesn't quite match in meaning. Answer choice C mentions the decline of oral storytelling. But the section of the text that mentions storytelling instead says that writing made it possible to record speech and tell stories. That's not the same, because decline means that people stopped telling stories, which the passage didn't say. All right, so we've seen why this can be a bit time-consuming. So how do we manage that timing? The simple answer is just to expect these questions to take more time. Other questions are faster. These are not. If you're running out of time and you see an accept question, skip it at first, then come back to it later. When you do answer it, be sure to scan the passage for keywords. You don't want to reread the whole passage for every answer choice. Just locate the specific sentences you need for each. A slow but steady process is more reliable than trying to guess the missing detail by memory. To sum it up, accept questions ask you to find the one answer that is not mentioned in the passage. You solve them by confirming that three choices are in the text and eliminating them. The remaining choice, the one that is unsupported, is the correct answer. These questions often reuse vocabulary or include logical-sounding distractors, so careful reading matters. Even though they take a bit longer, the process is very predictable. Check each choice, eliminate what the passage supports, and choose the one detail that doesn't appear. In this video, we're going to look more closely at a wrong answer trap that can be especially difficult to notice: distorted meanings. These are cases where the answer choice looks good at first, but if you read carefully, there's a problem with the wording. This trap appears in many different question types, but is especially common in detail questions. You look up the right part of the passage, you see the right keywords, and the answer choice seems to match, but the meaning has been changed in a small but important way. Often, the relationship between ideas is altered. Cause and effect may be reversed, a comparison may be changed, or the focus of the sentence may shift. Because the words look familiar, these answers can feel safe, even though they are wrong. A distorted answer can do several things right at the same time. It can use the correct vocabulary, refer to the correct sentence, and sound reasonable at first. That's why just finding keywords is not enough. You also need to understand how the ideas in the sentence relate to each other. If you are choosing between two options, look carefully not just at the text, but at the wording of the answer choices themselves. Sometimes there is a small problem with wording that changes the meaning of the sentence significantly. One way to avoid this trap is to focus on the actor and the action. In other words, who or what is doing something, and what are they doing? This usually means identifying the main noun and the main verb. In the example sentences here, there are a lot of similar words, but the main nouns and verbs are different. In the first sentence, hibernation is the actor and diverges is the action. It is contrasting hibernation between two groups. But in the second sentence, the actor is mammals and the action is are more diverse. Even without reading the text, if the question was about hibernation, then that seems wrong. This is a statement about the animals, not about their hibernation. One way this can be extra tricky is the addition of essential versus non-essential clauses. Essential information is necessary for the sentence's meaning. Non-essential information adds extra detail, but can be removed without changing the core idea. If an answer choice moves essential information into a non-essential clause, or treats non-essential information as if it were central, meaning changes. In this example, we have two sentences about brown bears awakening. In the first example shown, removing the time phrase changes the meaning of the sentence. In the spring is essential. In the second sentence, that has been placed into a non-essential clause. This structure, using the word which, is used for extra detail that is not required for the sentence to be complete. So this second sentence tells us that brown bears always feed largely on carrion. And if you know about bears, you know that's not true. They mostly eat plants. That change in meaning happens because of how the clause is placed. This is exactly the kind of distortion the TOEFL uses. Sometimes the distortion is complete. Instead of shifting a relationship a little, the answer choice says the exact opposite of what the passage states. This is distorted meaning taken all the way, and it's worth knowing as its own pattern because these answers can feel strangely right. You spot the keywords, the topic matches, but the meaning has been flipped. Reversals show up in a few common shapes. Cause and effect can be swapped, so that X causing Y becomes Y causing X. A purpose can be reversed, so that an action meant to prevent something becomes an action meant to encourage it instead. Or evidence being used to weaken a position is instead used as support. Here's a quick example. Imagine the passage says, warmer ocean temperatures are causing coral reefs to bleach. A reversal answer might say, coral bleaching is causing ocean temperatures to rise. The words all come from the passage, but the cause and the effect have swapped places. Or take a purpose reversal. If the passage says, farmers plant marigolds around their vegetable beds to keep insects away, a reversal answer might say, farmers plant marigolds to attract insects to their vegetable beds. Same plant, same farmer, but opposite purpose. The best defense against reversals is a quick sanity check. If an answer feels almost right but something is off, ask yourself, did the answer just say the reverse of what I read? That one question can prevent falling for this trap. Now let's look at a daily life reading passage. We've seen this passage before in other lessons, but if you don't remember it or haven't seen it, pause the video to read it first. The question asks how checked bags will be priced for economy passengers. We're going to look specifically at the first two choices, because they show the trap best. When we look back at the passage for how checked bags are priced, both of these answer choices will have nearby keywords. Here's the passage again. It says, each checked bag will be charged according to new weight-based fees, rather than flat rates. That sentence contains both essential and non-essential information, and it's important to separate the two. The answer choices we were choosing between are variable fees versus flat rates. In the text, flat rates are mentioned, but they are in a non-essential clause. The main sentence says that the fees will be based on weight, and weight, of course, can vary. The correct answer is the one that preserves the relationship described in the text. Pricing is based on weight. Choice B takes information from the right place in the text, but focuses on the wrong part of the specific sentence. Overall, distorted meaning answers often use the right words, but change the relationships between ideas. To avoid them, look beyond keywords. Check the main actor in action. Watch for shifts in comparisons, cause and effect, or time order, and pay attention to essential versus non-essential information. Okay, let's talk about one of the rarer types of questions you might see on the TOEFL, the reference question. These types of questions ask what a highlighted word or phrase actually refers to in the passage, usually a pronoun like it or they, or a short expression like this method or these ideas. The test isn't asking for a dictionary definition. Instead, it wants to know whether you can follow the author's chain of thought and identify who or what the text is pointing back to. So they are structural questions, but on a small scale. You only need to look at a couple sentences to answer them. If you see a question like this, it will highlight a small word, something like it, they, this, or those, or a short phrase such as these challenges. The meaning depends entirely on the nearby sentences, not on the standalone definition of the word. So it would be impossible to answer the question without reading the text, right? You'll need to go to the text and look at both the sentence with the phrase and the sentences before to see the connection. In other words, the TOEFL wants to make sure you can track which ideas in the passage are connected to which. Also worth noting, these questions are quick to answer, which is great, but they're also quite rare. You might not see it on your test at all. As for what they are testing, the real purpose of reference questions is to check that you understand how sentences relate to each other. In most English writing, the author won't repeat the same noun again and again, so they use pronouns to connect sentences. These questions test whether you can follow that structure. If you jump to conclusions too quickly, or focus only on the nearest noun, you'll often miss the actual logical connection that the author intended you to see. Most reference questions involve basic pronouns, but they can also involve short descriptive phrases. For instance, you might see these natural qualities, this challenging method, or that concept. Even though these expressions look simple, they are not always obvious. Notice that a phrase like that concept might refer back to a pretty big idea, not a single noun. So the phrase might refer to an entire sentence, or even a pair of sentences. Then the correct answer will be a paraphrase of the idea. It's not always as simple as finding a pronoun and an earlier noun that it matches with. But even so, the correct reference is usually just one sentence earlier, maybe two. They're close together, so you'll know where to look to find the answer. As for answering them, the approach is similar to many other reading questions. First find the highlighted word in the passage, then read the sentence before it, and sometimes the one before that. Do this before you read the answer choices, so you have the context in mind. If possible, try replacing the pronoun with nouns in your head. What other words could fit in the highlighted section? Making this prediction first can make it faster to find the answer in the choices. Seems easy enough, right? But these questions can feel harder than they seem, because the wrong answers are usually grammatically correct. All the options will match the number, singular or plural, so that alone won't help you. It's also common for several nouns to appear close together in the passage, which makes it tempting to choose one simply because it's nearby. But reference questions rarely work that way. The closest noun is not always the intended one, so you have to rely on meaning rather than position. Now, let's look at a sample reference question. The highlighted phrase is these early systems, and the question asks what that phrase refers to. Before we choose an answer, we need to go back to the passage and see exactly what was discussed right before this phrase appears. As always, our job is to see which earlier idea the author is pointing back to. In the passage, the phrase appears in a discussion of early writing traditions. Just before it, the author describes Egyptian hieroglyphs and early Chinese characters, two separate writing systems that developed independently. When we look closely, we see that both are grouped together conceptually right before the highlighted phrase appears, which is a strong clue for what these early systems should refer to. Also note that the sentence before gives two specific examples, Egyptian and Chinese writing. Then the sentence with the highlighted phrase makes a general statement about both. To confirm, we compare the phrase to the surrounding sentences. The author is talking specifically about the early writing systems used in Egypt and China, and how they functioned in similar ways. If we mentally replace the phrase with Egyptian and Chinese writing forms, the sentence still makes perfect sense. Replacing it with anything else, like civilizations or oracle bones, changes the meaning or doesn't fit the author's point. That's a good sign we found the correct reference. Finally, we can eliminate the incorrect options. Ancient spoken languages are never discussed in this part of the passage. The text is all about writing, not speech. Meanwhile, oracle bones are mentioned, but refer only to one specific writing material, not the two systems together, and our sentence with the highlighted phrase is making a general statement. Oracle bones are just too specific. And the third option, civilizations that created written characters, is too broad and doesn't match the topic well. Civilizations aren't the important thing. Their written languages are what's important. So that leaves us with the final answer choice. Only Egyptian and Chinese writing forms correctly replaces the phrase without changing the meaning of the sentence. To summarize, reference questions are about identifying who or what a word refers to, not really about vocabulary. Always check the previous sentence first, then test possible replacements until the meaning fits naturally. These questions are rare, but the skills they test, following an author's logic and keeping track of ideas, are used throughout the reading section, so they're not too different from detail or inference questions. Just keep applying the same approach, reading the relevance section, making predictions, and then looking at answer choices, and you'll get there. This lesson focuses on a specific question type called insert text. These questions ask you to place a missing sentence back into a passage in the position where it fits best. They're not very common, but when they do appear, past practice with this type of question will be very useful because there are common patterns and clues that you can use. In an insert text question, you're given a new sentence and 4 possible locations marked in the passage. Your job is to decide where that new sentence belongs. This question type tests paragraph structure and grammar, especially whether phrases in the sentence logically connect to what comes before and after it. These questions usually appear in academic passages, and you'll see at most 1 per reading module. It's also possible you won't see it on your test at all. If you do have an insert text question, it will probably include clue words that help you narrow down where the sentence can go. For example, pronouns like he or they need a clear reference. Similarly, the word the suggests something specific has already been introduced. Determiners like that or those also point backward, very similar to pronouns. And finally, transition words, such as however or in contrast, signal relationships between ideas. When you see words like these in the sentence to insert, it's never accidental. You're supposed to use them to find the correct placement. The connections between specific words are your best hints, but the overall topics are also important to look at. Most insert text sentences have familiar relationships with the passage. You might add a specific detail after a general idea, for example, or maybe the passage includes an effect and you need to insert the cause. As you go through the options, consider not just which words connect to which, but what the relationship between topics is. Here's the example passage we'll use. This should be familiar from other lessons. We've seen the same text a few times before. If you haven't read it, pause this video and read the passage now. And here is the question. The sentence we need to place is, these early records were practical in nature, used for documenting the exchange and ownership of goods. The first thing we should do is look for clues. Notice the phrase, these early records. That wording already tells us something important. The sentence must come after early records have been introduced. It cannot start a brand new topic because of the word these. We should also take note of the general topic, the use of these records for business. Looking at our sentence and passage together, we can go through each possible placement. Let's start with option A. At this point in the passage, writing in Mesopotamia has just been mentioned. The phrase, these early records, could possibly refer back to the earliest known writing. But it's not perfect. The word records sounds a bit more specific than the very general word writing. Even more importantly, the next sentence begins with people there. But the inserted sentence does not include a location for there to clearly refer to. Because of these reference problems, A does not work. So we can eliminate A and move on to option B. By this point, the passage has described early cuneiform symbols and explained that they represented objects and quantities like sheep or grain. That's a pretty good match for these early records to refer to. If we insert the sentence here, it will give clarification about the purpose of those symbols that showed numbers of sheep or jars. Not only does the sentence before option B work, the sentence after works as well. By placing here, we have a contrast between early records were practical and evolved to include signs for ideas. So this placement looks very good, but let's go through options C and D also to be sure. Option C appears after the passage moves on to other civilizations. At that point, the topic is no longer early Mesopotamian records, but independent writing systems in Egypt and China. Inserting a sentence about early record keeping here would feel out of place. The sentence that we are inserting talks about the purpose of one early writing type. The paragraph with option C, on the other hand, is comparing multiple civilizations and systems. The new sentence doesn't match the paragraph's introduction. Option D comes even later, when the passage is summarizing similarities across writing systems. By then, the text is drawing broad conclusions rather than explaining early practical uses. Adding a sentence about record keeping here would feel like going backward in the argument instead of moving it forward. What's more, the purpose of the writing explained in the sentence before option D is spiritual, not practical. Oracle bones used for divination aren't business documents, as our added sentence specifies. So the best answer is B, following our strategy of looking for references and logical connections. The phrase, these early records, is the most important clue, and the only place that it would really work is in B. Let's recap the most important stuff. Insert text questions are about connections. Always look for clue words in the sentence you're inserting, make sure references are clear, and check that the topic and logic flow smoothly. Going through the answer choices one by one is often the safest and most reliable approach. For each one, be sure to check references and connecting words like the ones we talked about in this lesson.